Today is all about fitting the bust when we're sewing woven tops for ourselves. Maybe it's an adjustment you know you need but you've been avoiding, or maybe you don't really think you need one but you might do. So it'll be pretty in-depth. I know this will improve your fit greatly if it's something that you need to do, so let's get on with it. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and we are back to fitting. I have been running a fitting series on the channel for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 months even. It's all about fitting a simple woven top that has a regular setting sleeve, a bust dart. Maybe this type of pattern that you've been looking at comes with bust cup size options, maybe it doesn't, maybe it has 1 or 2 cup size options. So we'll be going over how to get a better fit on the bust in the context that you've already made some length adjustments, you've already looked at the size chart, you know your circumferences, you've measured your body. There is already a number of videos up on the channel on this series already. You can see them. I'll put the thumbnails here so you can see how to measure yourself, how to choose your size, how to blend sizes, how to adjust for your height, for your length. So many things, what to do with darts, how to move them from one place to another. And we are finally at a stage where I think we can dive into this topic, which is fitting the bust. Maybe you have some previous knowledge about full bust adjustments and you just loathe them, and maybe your approach so far has been just to avoid the topic, thinking it will go away, and maybe just focusing on knit garments, maybe patterns that you know have worked for you, just making them over and over again, but not actually tackling the base issue at hand, which is having a different cup size than what your pattern is drafted for. So it's super common, it'll happen to so many of us. Most patterns are drafted for a B cup, and I'm talking about sewing bust cup sizes. I'm not talking about bra cup sizes. So whatever numbers you see on the bras in your drawer, just leave them there because you are not going to be using that when you choose your sewing bust cup size. The bust cup size, it is determined by a difference of 2 circumferences that we can measure for ourselves. And you can see in detail how to measure that in my How to Measure Yourself video. I'll put a thumbnail here. And I showed clearly there how to measure your high bust, which is this part right here, right above where your bust volume tissue starts, sort of underneath your arm, all the way up here. And having this measurement and trying to apply this to a pattern is really good to get a bit that is going to be appropriate for your upper chest and your shoulders. And then you have your full bust, which is the fullest part of your bust. So the difference between those 2 measurements are what determines your sewing cup size, in contrast to a bra cup size, which takes the underbust right underneath. It's sort of like your rib cage, the underbust and the full bust difference. And there can be much more difference in this area where the bra actually needs to cup your bust. It is an actual cup right there underneath your bust, which is different to sewing because we're just getting the fabric to fall over the bust. So I know the sewing bust cup size is a bit confusing because it's not an actual cup. So you might have a 4-inch difference between your underbust and your full bust, and you might wear a D or a double D cup bra. But if you measure yourself, you might actually find you only have a 2-inch difference here, and you might be a sewing B cup size. So don't look at your bra size and assume that that is the cup size that you need to use for your sewing. If you do that, you might end up making a garment that's just too big for you, maybe. So forget about that. Just measure yourself and figure out what your sewing bust cup size is. It is super important. And if you have a 2-inch difference or 5 centimeters in metric, you might find that you don't really need to do many fitting adjustments on the typical patterns that are drafted for a B cup, which are lots and lots of patterns. That seems to be the standard, although, you know, a lot of people aren't B cups. That is the way that patterns are made, so that the shoulders would fit that type of bust with that difference of 2 inches right there. When would you need a full bust adjustment? If your sewing cup size is different to the one that the pattern that you have is made for. So if you have a sewing B cup size and the pattern is made for a B cup size, you don't need to do a single thing. But then when we start getting into larger sewing cup sizes, C, D, E, some people call that double D, F, G, H, you start increasing each cup size by 1 inch. So what was a B cup and that had a 2-inch difference, When you get to a C cup, you have a 3-inch difference. You get to a D cup, you have a 4-inch difference. You get to the E cup or double D cup and you have a 5-inch difference, and so on and so forth. My chart here shows you up to an H, which is an 8-inch difference between the high bust and the full bust. If your high bust measured 42 and your full bust measures 50, that means that you have an H bust cup size. If you choose a pattern that only has a 2-inch difference and you just choose your size based on the full bust, it might fit you around here, but you're gonna have some issues. And I want to show you a muslin that I sewed for myself in a smaller cup size than what I need, so that we can see some of the things that might pinpoint drag lines, certain things that you might see when you make a garment like that, just choosing your size based on your full bust, when your actual sewing cup size does not match the one of the pattern. Of course, I tried to have a more exaggerated look for you to see, but my sewing cup size is a C and I sewed a pattern made for a B, so I'm going to try to show you as best as I can, although it could be more exaggerated if the bust cup size difference had been maybe 2 cup sizes. I hope it still helps you to see what that might look like. This is a top I made choosing my pattern based on my full bust measurement. This is based on a B cup and I have a C cup, and you can see some fitting issues, although they aren't too exaggerated. I would still need to correct this. I would not be happy to wear this top like it is right now. The first of them being that these drag lines here, you can see these drag lines diagonal from the bust towards the waist or even towards the hip. They could be, look at this, and that's just because the dart intake for this specific bust cup size is not giving me the correct shaping on the side. So if I make this dart a little bigger and just pinch it, you can see how much smoother this becomes right there. The other thing is, if I look up here on the top, you can see that my shoulder joint is about 1/2 inch narrower than what this shoulder is right here, and that's because I chose based on my full bust. So if I were to choose a size smaller and do my full bust adjustment, I would probably get a nicer fit here on the shoulder. Now, if you have more discrepancy between the base and the size you've chosen, this might be way more dramatic. You might have shoulders hanging down here, you might have necklines that are hanging off, gaping. So unfortunately on my body, I can't show you that dramatic look, but you can definitely see that my shoulders need bringing in right there to fit properly. And I would rather choose a size that fits my upper chest better and then fits my bust with the full bust adjustment. Now the bust dart is a little high on me, just a little high, and it just doesn't fit right. Now, if you are looking at a pattern that fits you correctly up here on the shoulders, but you feel that this is tight, it might be the difference in your body, you might have pulling like this across and you'll feel it. So that is another thing that you might see. And another one is that the front might be hanging a little shorter than the back. When I go sideways, you can see it. You can see it slightly longer on the back and pulling up here. And that's because this bust cup size is not accommodating for this length. So when you do the full bust adjustment, what you do in essence is add width and length, and that will give you correct shaping here. It will make the dart bigger, it will make the center front a little longer, it won't change your side seam, and then you have a correctly fitting top. Look at this diagonal line here, it's horrible. I would not want to wear this like this. I would not want to wear a top that fits me this way at all. And it can be corrected with a larger dart, a longer front, a little bit extra width, and then maybe I didn't really need these shoulders to be hanging off because I chose this top based on my full bust measurement and not my high bust measurement. So I hope seeing this helps. You saw that my pattern was slightly wide at the shoulders, slightly wide at the neckline, and as I said, the example that I can show on my body isn't that exaggerated because it's only 1 cup size difference. Is it worth doing a full bust adjustment? For sure, it really is worth it. And although in the past sometimes I haven't done it, I should have. And I think it's worth it to make a full bust adjustment if you need 1 cup size extra. If you really want to get the best fit that you can, it's not a hard adjustment to do. to have that improved shaping on the sides, have a better fit up here on the top. So it is worth it. And if you have never done a full bust adjustment, and for example you have a D sewing cup size and you just choose your size based on your full bust on a pattern drafted for a B cup, yeah, it might fit here, but it's not going to have the correct shaping on the side. You're going to have drag lines anyway, and you're going to have shoulders falling off you. You might have gaping armholes or necklines, so many things. So it is worth it, definitely. So I'm going to make myself tiny and go off to the side of the screen because I want to show you some examples on some size charts, what you might find out there in some indie brands. Now I have chosen 2 patterns. One of the ones I recommended, I just want you to see what a chart could look like. There are 2 different size drafts, which is pretty common. I see this in a lot of brands that they do one draft for a 0 to 20 size, and then that one's based on a B cup size. That means it's got a 2-inch difference from the high bust to the full bust. And then they have a separate draft from a 14 to a 30 that has a D cup size. That means that there's a 4-inch difference there. So when you look at these size charts, you know, they might tell you what the difference is between the high bust and the full bust. So how do you know how to choose your size if you're not a B cup or a D cup? Don't take your high bust measurement that you know and just plot it there on the full bust measurement on the chart and choose that size as the base to do the full bust adjustment. That's not what you have to do. You need to find the high bust measurement on the chart. Maybe the high bust won't even be on the chart. It's empty up there, there's nothing there. So you need to just subtract and figure out what the high bust is for either the B or the D cups around the sizes that you're thinking you might fall into. It's a little bit of a detective work to figure out what the high bust is in the pattern because sometimes it's just not there. But it's not too hard. You're either taking away 2 inches if it's a B or you're taking away 4 inches if it's a D cup. So you can see here the numbers are filled in at the gaps where there wasn't a number before. And for the B cup draft, if you look at every single size, you see a full bust measurement, and above you'll see that the high bust measurement is 2 inches smaller. So find your high bust for your body, choose the size there that has that high bust, and then do the full bust adjustment based from there. If you have a cup size larger than a D cup, E, F, G, and you fit within the size range of 14 to 30, you'll be much better off starting with that D cup base for your full bust adjustment. If you have a smaller size, say you're a size 16 and you have an E cup size, this size 16 is drafted for a B. So you will need to do a full bust adjustment taking you from a B to an E cup. Totally possible. Now in the next example, we have a pattern that the size range from 0 to 20 has B, C, and D cup sizes, which is amazing. I love that because there's so many more options for you to find a cup size that's going to be closest to your fit. So if you're a size 16, for example, and you are an E cup, you can choose the size 16 D cup there that matches your high bust and do a full bust adjustment onto that based on the D cup. Because the closest you are, it's easier to do that full bust adjustment. So in this case, the B, C, and D cup sizes available from 0 to 20 are super handy. Although then for the 14 to 30 range, you only have a D cup. You don't have any higher than that. So if you have a larger cup size than that, you would need to adjust based on the D if you fit into that sizing. There is one specific indie brand that I'm a really big fan of, and that's Itch to Stitch. And for woven patterns, you will find all the cup sizes from A to double D in all the sizes. So even if you're a size 2 and you have a double D cup, you can choose that size. And if you have a larger than a double D cup, you can adjust based on the double D. So if you have the smaller cup sizes, you won't need to play around and do full bust adjustments if you fit into those sewing cup sizes. The double D cup is equivalent to the E. So if you're an F, G, H, you might need to do a full bust adjustment onto the largest cup size available in the pattern, which is still possible, still very possible. But just the fact that all the cup sizes from A to double D are available in all the sizes is super, super handy because, you know, you're most likely to find a cup size that's going to be easiest for you to work with as a base. Let's start by talking about the patterns that you have that are based on a B cup size. Now, for every cup size that you're increasing 1 inch. in total across the front. But we work with half pieces on the pattern, right? Maybe you can make a sign and stick it on your wall for every cup size that you're adjusting. From the base that the pattern has, it's half an inch difference. If you're taking your front piece from a B cup to a C cup, you're increasing an inch across the front, but on the pattern you're doing half an inch. If you're taking your pattern from a B cup to a D cup, that's a 2-inch difference, so you're adding 2 inches across the front, but on the actual pattern piece, you're adding 1 inch. If you want to take your pattern from a B cup to an E cup, or a double D, like others call it, that is a 3-inch difference that you need to add across the front, which means you're adding 1.5 to your pattern piece. So that is really important. Now I'm creating a little printable for you with all these little charts that maybe you can have really handy so you don't have to think about them. I know them by heart, but if you haven't done these adjustments yet, you're not going to know them by heart, and you might want to look and see so you can have a guide to what you want to do for your specific scenario. In the first clip that I'm going to insert here, I'm going to show you the basic lines that you draw onto your pattern piece. It's not hard at all. I'm going to do it step by step. You'll see diagrams on the screen, and the example I'm going to show you is how to take your pattern from a B cup to a C cup, which means we're just adding half an inch to the pattern piece. But you'll see later on that the hinge points and all the manipulation you do is going to be the same whether you're adding half an inch, an inch and a half. It'll just start looking a little bit different on the pattern itself. It'll start changing the shape of the armhole a little bit more when you're doing these full bust adjustments from a B to a C, from a B to a D, from a B to a E. You can see how much larger that side bust that becomes and how larger the intake is on the side. And that's to compensate the difference that you have in this area here, so that you have an even front and you don't have that front pulling up in the center, and you have a nice smooth side without diagonal drag lines from the lack of shaping right there. So you'll see that happening, and that's what you need to create the proper fit shaping for your bust. Let's see how this is done. You are going to be able to do this, and once you get the hang of it, when I've done this on patterns, I'm not kidding you, it takes me like 2 minutes to do my lines, cut apart, fill in the paper, and I'm done. This is a front piece that we will be modifying to do a full bust adjustment to. Your woven pattern with a single bust that might look very similar to this. Doesn't really matter what pattern this is. The first steps that you do is make sure you have your single notch for your sleeve marked there, because it will serve as reference. You need to draw the seam allowance at least partially on this section here, because we will be using that as a reference as well. We have our single bust dart there. Now this is for a B cup, and you can see that the dart volume is different to a dart drafted for a C or a D cup. The larger the cup size, the larger the dart becomes. After drawing your seam allowance, you will need to determine where the bust point is on the pattern. The pattern might have that marked or it might not. Don't worry about where the bust height is at this moment, because you are going to change that at the end anyway. Let's assume that the bust point is away from the tip of this dart by about 1.5 inches. Which would usually be the case for a B cup. This dot will be an important pivot point, so let's mark it really well right there so you can see it. The next thing you want to draw is a line right across the middle of the dart up to the bust point. So you can measure the half point there, or if your dart has it trued, you might have a little tip coming out like that. Otherwise, just measure it and mark the half, and then go through the dart tip up to the bust point there with your line. That's the line that you see in green. I hope you can see these lines. The next line you're going to draw is from that bust point up to where the notch of the sleeve is, around there. Don't get hung up too much on where this has to be. You will see different tutorials put it lower. I've seen some put it right to the corner, others to like the bottom third. Other tutorials show it up higher, so do not get too hung up on where it is. I'm going to place my line around where the notch is. It doesn't have to be right on it, but the next line you want to draw is going to be vertical. Measure from the center front up to your bust point, that red dot, how much you have. Remember how much it is, and measure the same over here, and then draw a line. I've marked the lines a little darker so you can see them better. And now from this area in the center, just choose any spot and do a line across. It doesn't really matter where. Also, don't get hung up too much on where it is. You just need a line across here somewhere. It could be lower, it could be higher, just make a line somewhere. Now I'm going to play around a lot with this pivot point, so I'm going to put a piece of tape on top of that red dot just to keep it intact a little bit and prevent it from ripping. What I'm going to do now is cut from this bottom line up to the red point and then across right up to the seam allowance line, not through it, not towards the edge of the paper. So you have that hinge point there, and you also have a little hinge right there. From the edge of the paper, I'm going to cut up to there as well, always leaving a little bit of paper intact there so that this can pivot. Now I'm going to slice through the middle of the dart, and that's why we had drawn that line at the beginning. And we're going to stop right before the edge of the paper so we can also pivot there. It's really handy to have your cutting mat underneath. We are taking first this B cup top into a C cup. That means that we need to spread apart on this line by 1/2 inch, and it needs to be even all the way down from here to the bottom. So you can spread this apart like that. You see that when I spread this 1/2 inch on this side, I have 1/2 inch there, I have 1/2 inch there. This moves on its own and makes the dart bigger. This also pivots. The shape of the armhole changes slightly, but the stitching line does not change. That means that you don't need to change your sleeve at all. So this is what you would do if you were taking your B cup top to a C cup. You can see that when you do this, your bust point goes lower. So it used to be up there and now it's a little bit lower. This is the reason why you don't need to worry about where the dart is located before you do the full bust adjustment. You do this first, you create space on the width and on the length for your bust. You open up this dart to accommodate for the larger volume of the cup, and then after all that's done, then you measure and you figure out if you need to move your dart lower or higher. Now you can see that over here, this center front is shorter than this side piece. And that's why we did this line right there. So let's cut across this one. And let's bring this down to match this one right there. You can see that with the full bust adjustment, you have added length to the center front right there. But actually, your side seam hasn't changed. It will still match the same back piece that you're using for the pattern, no matter what cup size you're adjusting to on your front piece. So you don't need to worry about the back. The back is going to match. Once your dart is closed there, you're going to have the same distance total in the side seams. You do not need to worry about that. This is how the full bust adjustment looks when you've just taken it from one cup size to the next. So you're just adding 1 more inch across the whole front. Because this is half of the front, you have that 1/2 inch there. It does add some width to the top. It opens up an amount of space here for the bust volume, and it also adds some length to the center front. You can clearly see it here with the paper that's behind here filled in with pink. I'll close up right here so you can see something that needs to happen next. You can see a red dot there, and that's because I've taken this dart point and backed it away. Remember, the original dart reached around that point there. You can see the original blue line. And because the bust adjustment here is so small, it didn't bring the dart that much out to the side. I think if I left it right there, it would be too close to the apex. So you want to back it away, and I've backed it away the same amount that I'd increased it to mark the bust point there, 1.5 inches further in from that tip right there. And now I would just redraw my dart legs. You can see the blue lines there just to match that point there, and then match that point there. It's not much of a difference. It'll make it a bit narrower here. Just redraw these right here and correct them. This looks messy, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be pretty. What's important is that it is effective and that you are going to cut a pattern piece that's going to fit you better. What you would need to do is fold this dart, close it, and then true it on the sides. I'm going to show you how that's done in a little bit. After completing your full bust adjustment, you'll notice that you not only added width to the bust area where you need it, but it goes all the way down to the hem. So you would have added that same amount, in this case 1/2 inch. It could be more depending on the bust adjustment you're doing. It's been also added to the waist and the hip circumference. So if your initial assessment of the pattern meant that you maybe needed to blend out to a larger size at the waist, maybe because you've added extra now, you can blend into your original size, or maybe you do need that extra width across the front. Don't think too much about it. You can always take the side seams in with the muslin to see if you do want to remove that amount on the side seam, or if you just want to leave it. Don't stress too much about it, because this is always something that you can make a decision on when you have your muslin on, rather than just doing it on the paper straight away. but you can easily take it in, blending in from under the bust to the waist and the hips if you think that you don't need that extra width below and you just need it around your bust. I want to point out one thing, and that is the dart that you might have there, it might not match your bust height. But if you are going to do a full bust adjustment, don't worry about that. Don't even touch it. You don't need to measure it. You don't need to deal with that at all. Because during the process of doing the full bust adjustment, what is going to happen to that paper pattern is that we're going to add width and we're going to add length. So that bust dart in the end, after you've done the full bust adjustment, is going to end up with the tip moved towards the side a little bit and lower than the original dart on the pattern was. So there's no point in you moving that dart up and down to match your body and then doing the full bust adjustment, because it's going to end up lower. So maybe if you did need it to be lower, maybe the full bust adjustment is going to actually make that dart be where it needs to be. Or maybe it's going to be too low for you and you'll need to raise that dart. Maybe you need to raise it, maybe you don't. Let's see a little bit more in this clip. I'm going to take this modified front that I've taken from a B to a C cup just as reference, because the process would be the same. I have my little template that I've shown you how to draw for yourself so you can mark heights on your pattern, your bust height. So this is half of my neck width right there that I've drawn. And I'm just going to place this matching the center front right there. I'm going to draw the seam allowance on the shoulder seam and continue that slope. So I have my neck width right there, and from that shoulder slope I continue with my ruler up to where I reach the edge of the paper right there. And that is from where I'm going to measure down to see where my bust height is on this pattern. I'd like to mark this height with the same instrument I used to measure myself. I don't use the ruler to measure my body. So from that blue point I drew there, I'm going to draw a straight line down to where my bust height is. And actually I don't need to do anything with this dart. When you do a full bust adjustment, it will lower the dart anyway. This was the bust point before. If I draw that tip right there, that's where it was before. It was higher, but because we've spread it, this little process that happens right there makes the dart end up lower than what it was originally. So you might need to change this, you might need to move it up and down. You know, you might find that the dart is too low for you now after the full bust adjustment. So measure, make sure you know what your bust height is, put it on the pattern after you've done this, and then according to your needs you can cut out a rectangle here with your dart and move it up and down so that it matches your actual bust height. I will link a video I have about this already in full detail, but for this specific pattern I would not need to do anything with the dart. The process of doing the full bust adjustment lowered the dart the amount that I needed it to be lower for my body. Quit playing with the same pattern. Let's see how it would look like when you're taking your basic pattern front piece from a B cup to a D. You're adding 2 extra cup sizes, which means you're adding 2 inches. And then on the pattern, you'll see an inch in that vertical spread area there that you see. If you wanted to take your woven top from a B cup to a D cup, that is a 2 cup difference. That means that you're adding 2 inches. But because we're just working with half of the piece, it'll be 1 inch. So instead of having that half an inch separation here that you do to increase 1 cup size, you will increase it by 1, and that means that you separate here by 1 inch. You can see this becomes wider. This angle of the armhole becomes slightly raised as well, but again we haven't changed the length of the armhole. It will still match your sleeve, and your dart became larger than it was with a B cup. Also, you will need to move this little piece down further to match that, and you have extra length right there. Still, your side seam is going to match your back piece. That doesn't change at all. So this is the adjustment you would do if you were going from a pattern that's based on a B cup to a D cup. Now let's see the same one, how it looks like when you're taking your pattern from a B to a E cup or a double D. It's the same thing. You're adding 3 inches across the front. On your pattern piece, you're adding 1.5. Let's see how that looks. Now, if you were wanting to increase 3 cup sizes from a B to a E or a double D, some call it like that, then the increase here would be 1.5 inches. So again, keeping it always parallel, you would have 1.5 inches here. That would make your dart larger. It would change the curve of the armhole. You can see it's becoming more L-shaped, and then this would come down further to match that center front, and that is how your piece would be. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to fill up the gaps and complete this so I can have a full pattern piece for an E cup for this pattern. So taking it from a B cup to an E cup. 3 whole cup sizes, 1.5 inches added there. The other 1.5 inches would be added on the other side. That's why you're just working on half of this. And then I'll show you how I'm going to draw this start right there. I've taken the time to fill in the gaps so you can see what really happened here. You can see in pink the changes that were made, how we added some width and some length to accommodate for the bust volume there. That was really not going to fit very well with a smaller bust cup size and a smaller dart. By doing this, you ensure that this area stays the same on the top, that the neckline and the shoulders are going to fit. You've chosen your size based on your high bust, so that is going to fit correctly, and then you've accommodated the space that you needed for the larger bust that you have. Because by doing this full bust adjustment, we've added all that amount of space there, the dart was moved to the side, which is usually what you need when you have a larger bust volume. We might not need to back up this dart, so I'm not going to change this. You know, you can change the length of this when you do your muslin. If you feel it's too close to your bust, you can come back to your pattern and just make the point a little further away like that, and then redraw your dart legs from here to the new dart point right there. But I'm actually not going to do that right now, although you could if you wanted to. Now if the bust adjustment was a smaller amount and I'd only added 1/2 inch, I would definitely back away that dart, because I would feel that it's going to be too close to the center of the garment and then too close to the actual bust point. Let's just close up this dart and true this so it makes sense. You can't just cut it randomly and eyeball that. Okay, that's as best as I can close it. It is pretty stiff paper, so just make sure you close it. You push all that dart volume down. Take your ruler and unite this so it makes sense right here, and then cut it. When you have a large dart like this for a larger cup size, you want to sew your dart, but you want to cut away this excess. You really don't need that volume extra on the side of your bust when you already have a larger volume on your bust. So sew that dart, and then from about here, just trim it away and leave it at 3/8, and it'll be less bulky on the side. So for this specific pattern, you're not going to get that pokey bit coming out like that too much. It might be like that on other patterns that have a different shape here on the side seam. So this is actually what's going to work with this pattern. You can see that when you close it, the side seam is very even, and it's actually got to do with the fact that the difference between the bust, the waist and the hips is not that much on this pattern. It's quite straight on the side. You might find a whole different shape here if the pattern has more shaping on the side, but that is what is going to work with this one. Now I have a whole different pattern piece to use as a base, and that is because a lot of patterns have a D-cup base from sizes 14 to 30, or you might have another pattern that has that type of cup size as a base in a different size range, and it might be the one that you need as a base for you. So it'll be different than taking it from a B cup to a larger cup size for sure. It'll be much better if you start with that base, if you have a larger cup size than that, and if the size is also appropriate for you. So remember the rule, for each cup size you're adjusting, you're adding 1 inch, but on the pattern you're adding half. If you want to take this D cup to an E cup, you would be adding 1/2 inch to the pattern here in that vertical area. If you're taking it from a D to an F, you're adding 2 cup sizes, you're adding 2 inches, you're adding 1 inch to the pattern. And from a D cup to a G cup, you're adding 3 cup sizes, you're adding 3 inches, you're adding 1.5 here on the center. So it'll be quite similar to what we did previously in the amounts that you're adding, but because you're working on a base that already has a larger cup size, you'll see the side bust dart get larger and larger and larger, and I think there is a limit to that into how you can sew this properly, but I'll touch on that in a little bit. In the next little clip, let's see how it looks like when you take your pattern that has a D cup and you want to transform it to an E cup. You're adding 1 extra cup size. Now, I've done the exact same lines you've already seen me do before, but this is based on a D cup. So you will find plenty of indie companies now that are drafting for a B cup and another size draft for a D cup with the larger sizes. So let's say, for example, you're a size 24 and this pattern is drafted with a D cup. You might not be a sewing D cup, you might have an even larger cup size than that. You might have an E or an F cup. So it will still be beneficial for you to use the D cup bodice base and adjust from there. And it will be easier than adjusting based on a B cup bodice. So it is still a good option. although you might still need more space than the sewing D cup size. So the process would be exactly the same. You would cut from here up to that red dot on the outside of that red dot, and then up to that red dot right there, and then through the middle of the dart up to there, leaving that little hinge point there. And you cut from the outside where the notch is up to there, leaving a little hinge there as well, and then from the middle of the dart through to there. This is a D cup top. If you want to take it from a D to a E or a double D like some call it, you would just add 1/2 inch here in the center. Remember, keeping it parallel right there, the same amount here, the same amount there. That will open up your dart a little bit more and will take you from a D to a E cup size with a larger dart right there. And you would also need to cut this away and adjust the length right there. And this is a way that you add 1 extra cup size from a D to a E. And let's see how that one would look if you're taking it from a D to an F cup size, which is adding 2 more cup sizes to the pattern right there. You're adding an inch to the pattern. Let's see. Now if you want from a D to an F, then you would add an inch. And that's how a pattern that has a B cup could work for you as well, and you could get a better fit without compromising the length of the armhole. You can still use your sleeve. This doesn't change the length of your side seam. You can still use your normal back piece without making any adjustment, and you will just make this longer in the center front, and that would be your full bust adjustment from a D cup base. Something else that you might encounter with some patterns, and I mentioned specifically itch to stitch because you have up to a double D cup size or an E. You might be working with that larger cup size on the pattern as your base. So your base is an E. If you want to take your pattern from an E to an F, you're adding an inch. You're adding 1/2 inch to that pattern. Using that double D or E as a base will for sure improve your fit if you think that you're seeing some of the issues that I've mentioned before. So just let's see a little bit about that. Now, if the pattern that you're working on has a double D cup as an option and you wanted 1 extra cup, same, for each extra cup you're adding, you are just spreading apart by 1/2 inch in the center area. You've noticed that in all the examples I'm showing you, I haven't shown you any where I'm increasing more than 3 cup sizes from the base. I haven't shown you one where I'm adding more than 1.5 inches to the front piece right there. And actually, you'll see a lot happen with this, especially when you're working with the larger cup sizes. You'll end up with such a big dart here on the side, and it's so hard to sew that nice and accurately and for it to look smooth on the body when you have such a huge dart intake. And I'm looking at a dart intake that might be maybe 4 inches or more. It just gets really hard to sew that really nicely. So what can you do? What can you do if you have, for example, an H cup size, which has an 8-inch difference from the high bust? So if you're working with a D cup pattern base, you're adding 4 more cup sizes. That means you're adding 4 inches across the front. That means you're adding 2 inches. And I haven't shown you an example about that. So I want to show you how that would look. And also, there's another alternative method here that's not talked about that much at all, and it's called a Y bust adjustment. And it could be an alternative to create a full bust adjustment that has enough space for your bust in the length and the width, but it will limit the amount that dart is going to grow by adding space around here, just a little bit different. So let's see the Y full bust adjustment. Okay, I've left this one for the very end, and this could be an alternative when we're working with larger bust cup sizes and you find that the dart you're generating is just too wide. So there is an alternative way to still add space for the bust without adding so much to the dart. Although the dart will still increase, you would result in a dart that's smaller than the original bust adjustment would. Let's take for example that this is based on a D cup and you want to take it to an H cup. That is 4 extra cup sizes than what this pattern is drafted. That means that you need to add 4 inches in total on the front. That means that on this half we are adding 2 inches. So in the traditional bust adjustment, you would spread this apart by 2 inches. And this generates quite a large dart. If you measure from that dart leg to the other, I already measured it, it's 6 inches. And it could be very difficult to sew a dart with that volume, and it end up looking nice and smooth and neat on the inside. The bulk inside is going to be quite significant. There's another option that you can try. From that bust point right there, I've drawn it in pink and you can see it on the diagram there. Just draw an extra line up to the middle of your shoulder. Draw your seam allowance the same way you draw it here and cut up to the seam allowance, and you're going to have a little hinge point there. That is a little hinge point. You also cut from the edge up to there. That will conserve the shoulder width. You're not going to change it. And now what you do is that you have another way to manipulate this. So let's put this back together. You can see this shape there and that shape there sort of looks like a Y if you were looking at this way. Let's spread this by 2 inches the same. But now you see that you have this other area also spreading. You're actually adding volume on all this area. It still will work very well. You will still take this down to meet the center front right there. But when you measure from here to there, it's not going to measure 6 inches anymore. In this case, it measures 4.5. You end up with a little less intake here, although it's still a large dart. It's not so large like the previous one was. And you still created the volume for your bust. You still have the width that you need, the extra length that you need for this to work. You haven't modified your armhole, you haven't modified the shoulder width. Of course, you need to test this on a muslin and see if you like it. It's worth a try. This is a Y bust adjustment. And it's not hard to do at all, it's just one extra cut. I'll put this back together again so you can see. So we're taking this from a D cup to an H cup. We're adding 2 inches in the center right here, keeping it always very parallel, and you can see that spreading out and adding extra space there. Everything is very flat. You have that hinge point there, you have that hinge point there, which means that you're not changing these lengths. You're keeping it the same. Your sleeve will fit. You're still making this dart larger, but it's not as large as when you don't have that cut line. You're just opening it there like that, and then this is a lot bigger than if this weren't also helping by opening. So you can see that with the Y full bust adjustment, you still accomplish what you want, which is adding extra width, adding extra length for the extra cup sizes that you need. But you can see that you can make that dart a little bit smaller than it would be originally if you were just doing the traditional bust adjustment. You saw that there was a 1.5 inch difference in the dart intake that you would save. You know, you'd end up with a smaller dart and would be so much easier for you to handle and sew and for it to look and hang nicely on the body. When I was researching and I found this one, I thought it was really good. I think it is a good alternative for you to try out if you do need a bust adjustment that will add 4 extra cup sizes to the base that you're working with. It'll distort the armhole less. You know, it'll create a dart that's not so big as a traditional one, and you'll still be able to fit your bust and keep the shoulder size and everything up here the same. Your high bust is unchanged and you'll have a better fitting garment for sure. Now, I've left this for the end because I know some people really don't like this, but I love myself a good maths formula. There is a really simple one that you can do. You could stick it somewhere on the wall where you can see it, and it'll help you do a full bust adjustment super easily. It's basically taking your full bust minus your high bust minus the cup size the pattern is drafted for, divided by 2. And you divide it by 2 because you're working on half of the pattern. So this would give you the exact number that you need to add to your pattern piece, which is half of the front, of course. So taking a really broad example here, I just bring a chart here. For size 16, that is my case. My high bust is 40, my full bust is 43, and my pattern is drafted for a B cup, so that there's a 2 inch difference there. So I would take my little formula, 43 minus 40, that's 3, minus 2, because that's a difference for the B cup. That will give me 1. Divided by 2 is half. So when I do my full bust adjustment, I would need to add half to my pattern. And if you do this formula, you're not thinking about cup sizes, you're not really thinking about all the things I was telling you from a B to a D, from a C. If the letters confuse you, you know, you can resort to numbers and maths, and you always have an exact result, which will be exactly the same as I mentioned of adding that 1/2 inch to each cup size you're adjusting from the base. If you're working on a pattern that has a D-cut base, instead of subtracting 2 at the end, you will subtract 4. So for example, if your full bust is 48, your high bust is 42, subtract that, that gives you 6. 6 minus 4, that is what the bust cup size is on this pattern, will give you 2. If you divide 2 by 2, you get 1. So you would be adding 1 inch to half of the pattern there, and it's something that might help you if you're more numbers, maths oriented. That's why I left it at the end, because I know a lot of people won't like to do this. They would prefer to just have a little chart that tells them how much to add per cup size difference. But I wanted to give you lots of options. I know we're all different and we all have different approaches to sewing. I'm super maths oriented in sewing, but that's just my own thing because I like that. But you might prefer it with the cup sizes next to the numbers and all of that. So I hope this was helpful. I really do. I know the video is super intense and a bit long, but I didn't just want to show you how to do the paperwork and not go into depth about examples of different cup sizes, because I know we're all different and we all need different adjustments. And I didn't just want to show you what I have to do, which is take mine from a B to a C. I wanted to include as much as I could. So I really hope this helps you get a better fit on your woven top. I'm excited to hear from you if you do try this for the first time and what your thoughts are about your feet. And I will have a whole separate video on small bust adjustments because I think it's just as important, and I've had really specific requests for this for quite a while now. So I'm working on that one as we speak. I hope you enjoy your fitting journey. Take it slow, no rush. Have some extra scraps that you can practice until you're happy. Once the bust fits you properly on a garment, it just makes a whole world of difference. You're gonna feel so much better and more comfortable. And I think it's really important to focus on that. That's all for now for bust adjustments in full-blown detail. Bye and happy fitting.